This is going to be a bit of a weird talk because I kind of only wrote it 4 hours ago. It's a composite of several other talks, and you see, I blagged my way in because I was going to come and talk to you about really, really geeky crypto in Go, and instead I've only got some moderately creepy geeky crypto in Go, because it occurred to me, nobody ever knows why my talks exist. I go all kinds of places and I talk about mad stuff you can do at a low level, and nobody ever does it, because they don't know why they should. So this talk is sort of like, it's inspired by a talk I gave to a bunch of Rails developers in India earlier this year, just to prove that I do still play with Ruby and Rails people. And it was about privacy. Because what I do for a living, I'm a digital identity architect. This means other people allow me to create digital identity systems for them. And the main purpose of my life is to make sure that everything I stick in databases, no one can get out. Governments, private institutions, people who've lost their keys. And this isn't sort of like a big obsession of mine. I'm not sort of a cypherpunk sort of territory person, although my business partner is. He's the obligatory 6 foot tall, well, 6'4" tall goth, who used to be security manager for Symbian, and knows all the people who actually build the hardware for HSMs, and he can really go on for many, many hours about twisted Edward curves, which for those of you who know anything about crypto, that's sort of the new hotness in elliptic curve, is twisted Edward curves. To me, they're just really nice diagrams on paper that I can treat as a sequence and pick a number of. I've got a really dumb-headed approach to this. So there are 2 versions of this talk I can give today. One has code in line. The other doesn't have any code, but I promise to show you some code at the end off my hard drive. Who would like to go for option 1 with code in line? Who would like to trust me to pick random pieces of code that will make sense from my hard drive? I don't blame you. A lot of what this talk is actually about is trust, sort of, maybe. It gets mentioned anyway. Let's get, oh. Now, this is another first for me. I've never tried to control my computer off of my iPhone before. So this is bound to go hideously wrong because I am a complete Luddite, and technology does not do what I want unless I'm actually writing code. Okay, it's supposed to be about code. There will be some code. At some point, this will decide to flip the slide. Now, I'm going to have to stand still. I hate standing still. I am not a natural I'm not a natural stander still. There is loads of code you can get that's in the public domain that I have produced in the past. This is 9 years' worth of random adventures in crypto in Ruby and Go. If you ever want to do something really horrible involving crypto over a network connection, it's all in there. And if you're a bit of a Go fundamentalist and you only want it in Go, the first chapter of this book is free. You do not have to buy it. But by page 60 of it, you are encrypting random stuff with RSA keys and pumping it down UDP. What greater testimonial can I give than you don't have to buy the book, you get the crypto for free. Admittedly, only with Hello World, but I mean, you know. The point about what I really want to talk about today is we all have secrets. Secrecy is actually the bedrock on which polite society exists. There are many things that if we knew about the people that we were doing business with, or married to, or sharing a bus with, if there are many things that they've done or going through their heads that if we knew it, we would not go near them with a barge pole. A lot of people say that secrecy is the same as lying, but it isn't. Secrecy is, well, the Catholic Church would say it's a sin of omission, but secrecy is choosing not to give up information unless you have to, and that can be pushed to a very extreme point. Some secrets truly are awful. For all I know, there could be an infinite number of global conspiracies. I've certainly played a card game that would incline me to feel that way. Infidelity happens so regularly that only 50% of marriages actually last full term. Oh, we've gone all the way back to the beginning. No, it's okay. We'll turn this off, and then we shouldn't have a problem. Criminality. The black economy of this country, the black economy isn't actually criminal, it's just borderline criminal, is worth tens or possibly hundreds of billions of pounds. The criminal economy is worth a similar amount on top of that. Criminality is all over the place. All of those are secrets. But at the same time, no other secrets are actually, none of us have any problem with people having these secrets. Bank account numbers. Please give me all your bank details. I'd be prepared to send you an international wire draft tomorrow with $50 million. All you have to do is give me your PAX code and your SWIFT code. No problem. Oh dear, how sad. I've now got all your money. Embarrassing incidents. How many people at some point have got stupendously drunk in a public place and done something that if a photo of it appeared on Twitter, they wouldn't go to prison, but all of their friends would make fun of them for the rest of their life? Sexual preferences. I'm going to come back to this subject sort of tangentially in a while, because there's a sexual preference at present that's being bitch-slapped all over the newspapers. And I refer you back to the previous slide on infidelity. But these are all secrets that we believe it's best we can keep. Being outed for this or that or the other, unless it's relevant to what you're doing with somebody, really isn't acceptable. So many of us would tend to believe that secrecy should be absolute as far as one set's concerned. We're not so sure secrecy should be absolute about the other set, especially not with regards to other people. I mean, if I'm a master criminal, I certainly want secrecy to apply to my crimes. But I don't necessarily want any other master criminals to be successful. I mean, they're competition. So a lack of secrecy, a total transparency for all other master criminals would be a good thing. But if we're going to have absolute secrecy, that means we actually have to build technology that can do it. And the vast majority of devs have no idea how to build technology that can even do a little bit of privacy, let alone bulletproof. Well, there is genuine bulletproof secrecy. Never keep anything. Send it all through dev null. Somebody else might go around reading your memory and they might reconstruct stuff for you. Fine. They've just solved your problem of how to get your data back. Okay. Sometimes I can be a little bit facetious. Okay. But we need to have the absolute to protect what is trivial. Because actually, the secrecy itself, the tools we use, the mechanisms we use, they don't care what the content is. So if we're actually building to protect people from being picked on for this particular trait or from being able to do that particular incident they had go wrong in their life or for their bank account details, we have to accept that actually they also could be using that same secrecy, that same technology for planning international terror, launching illegal wars in countries, ripping off the citizens of their country for hundreds of billions of dollars. Because the technology itself is neutral. It's just, it either works or it doesn't. And if we build it so it doesn't work, we actually can't protect the things we do care about. However, it's all slightly more complicated than that. See, most people, when they set out to build a black box, and they learn how to do a black box, build a genuine black box. Stuff goes in, only the person who put it in can get it back out. Apple is having a lovely court case, I don't know if it's resolved yet, but in California over an iPhone. And the US government is actually trying to change the rules about the kind of security that can be embedded inside personal devices as a result of it. Because the state of California came along and it said, we've got this iPhone. It's been used by somebody to do something naughty, and we'd like to know all the data that's stored in it, please, in Keychain. Well, this uses using Keychain in the cloud. We can't give you that data. Well, you have to. So Apple's actually been subpoenaed several times over it and had contempt of court proceedings and everything. But they're right. They physically can't. Embedded in every little ARM system that they distribute is effectively a hardware security module. I'm not sure if it is actually secure core or not. Apple are very about what they do. But they have no physical way of getting back the stuff that's stored there. You lose your iPhone and your Mac and anything else that's attached to your keychain in the cloud, your passwords ain't coming back. They're going to live somewhere on a server for a long time, but they're never going to make it back onto a machine that can use them. And that is a clear breach of the law, not just in the States, it's a breach of the law here. You know, we have legislation here like the REPO Act, the Regulatory Investigative Power. I can never say it. We have lawyers to cover this on what I work on. But the REPO Act basically is, we need your data. Hand it over. You're criminally liable if you don't. You have been storing it for 7 years, haven't you? Every single bit of comms traffic, you have been storing it for 7 years? I do hope you have. That's a lot of hard drive space. So we need to comply with those laws, and that means somehow when we're doing this stuff, we have to, on the one hand, assist legitimate requests. You get a court order, you should be able to comply with it. Otherwise, you yourself are an accessory to whatever crime that court order would reveal. But at the same time, we should reject the illegitimate. If a policeman walks into our offices without a court order and asks to do that, we should not be able to comply. How do you do that? It can't be just a personal choice. I choose to comply, I choose not to comply. It has to actually be buried in tech. There has to be a tech solution that when that court order comes in, triggers some path that can never be triggered otherwise. So all of this, though, weakens secrecy. If we're going to comply with laws, we're no longer doing secrecy. What we are doing is privacy. Now, privacy is a very different thing. All of the things I listed as banal secrets, they all fall within the grounds of privacy. So does the fact that I don't really get on with my mother-in-law. I can say that here because she doesn't look at YouTube videos of conferences. But I don't get on with her. I get on with her better than my other half does, which is an embarrassing situation. And that's another secret, because obviously I have to disguise that it's an embarrassing situation when I'm dealing with her. Otherwise, the secret is out. The privacy of my own right to not like her would evaporate. So privacy is not absolute. Privacy requires, I'm being a bit strong in my definition here. Privacy doesn't actually require mutual trust. It requires trust on the part of the person that wants their privacy maintained. If I tell you a secret, now you're all party to the secret that I don't like my mother-in-law, it is very important that I have some sense of trust that you won't go and tell her. Well, my trust in this case is strengthened because you don't know where she lives, you don't know her email address, she never checks email anyway. And so it's a very small amount of trust I have to extend. But obviously, if you're all her best friends, I'm going to need a lot of trust that this many people wouldn't have one of them in who'd go, well, actually, I think she's more important. No, I don't trust. But effectively, when we model privacy, it's a lot better to consider that what we're dealing with is mutual trust. Two parties entering into a contract where they each agree that they will keep the privacy of the other. And being able to tie things into contracts is actually very handy. As programmers, we effectively have a lot of contracts in our systems that we expect this device and that device to obey. So once we've got a contract in the real world, we can sort of model that with code. It's also quite handy because we can offload all the difficult problems onto our legal systems. So in the UK, this is really good. Common law has been doing this for probably since the first Saxon decided that having a jury overlook something was a good idea. We can interrogate witnesses on either side and say, do we think they're lying? They are. Right, they clearly broke this particular contract. If it's a contract over privacy, of course, it's this person really has leaked your data. It's not a hacker got in. I mean, Ashley Madison appears to be a hacker got in. Hackers with that kind of scruple to care about infidelity, I have my doubts. Insider job springs to mind. Possibly somebody who was jilted by somebody that they decided to have an affair with who worked there. And, I mean, I'm just speculating, but I mean, you can see how this scenario plays out. Person with their hands on the system, easily lift a database. How else do you get 14 gig of your boss's email data? That's a person in ops. You know, do you trust your ops? If you've got a private database, do your ops have access to the keys? You know. Now, for a long time, obviously, nobody should have trusted them anyway, because I think a website that's built on the basis of we can give you secure anonymity, sort of, for infidelity by blurring your photos, hasn't really passed my basic metric for they give a fuck about nobody knowing who I am. But there are a lot of gullible people out there, and actually the fail case here is about the kind of users we really have when we build network systems. We don't build network. I mean, I bet there are people on there who are probably even considered to be great privacy architects or digital ID architects. I'm sure I've got some peers who are on there. But, you know, when we're actually using a service online, our brains go out the window. It doesn't matter how technical we are. We think, that solves my immediate need. You know? I mean, I riskily bought 2 things from Bulgaria and Romania this week on eBay. I broke a rule there that I've not broken in 14 years. Why? Because they were incredibly cheap, and I thought, it's within buyer protection, I can sue eBay. effectively. That's the thought process. But did I expect the two things to turn up? Actually, I didn't, because I know so many people who've bought technology from Bulgaria and Romania that it's never turned up, ever. No sign of it. eBay couldn't even find the person responsible. So, so there's a difference between security, no one can get in. Privacy, nobody can get at stuff that you don't want them to get at, you as a user. And trust, you're providing me a service and I actually believe you're capable of fulfilling it. Most users don't have enough concern about trust. Most software developers don't have enough concern about privacy. And most network people don't have enough concern about the right kind of security to support it all. Anybody here who runs their infrastructure would say, oh, I don't know, 3 firewalls, and they've got financial customers who say, yeah, you're really secure. Yeah. I wrote a system that was in use at HSBC for a while, doing single sign-on globally. They asked me to turn the security down. That says everything you need to know about the finance sector. You know, I'm sorry, you seem to be a little bit aggressive here. Turn the security down and we'll put 2 extra firewalls in. Which bit don't you like? Well, we think the one-time pads are expensive, and all of those signatures that you're putting on things. I mean, what do we need the signatures for? Okay, and you're a risk department for information security. Fair enough. Thankfully, it's no longer running there, so I no longer have to worry about the desperate phone call from somebody saying, you never turned the security down. Because obviously I didn't. To be honest, it would have been hard work. It wouldn't have just been throwing code away. It would actually have been sticking more code in to neuter the bits. Because, I mean, you know, you get something nice and clean and architecturally right, you have to add code to break it at that point. And it's quite frustrating when somebody asks you to do that. So we're going to have a little talk about applied paranoia, because I don't think any of us have enough of this. And now I'm running on slides I've done before, so I don't have to use my brain. So firstly, we all know what paranoia is. We've probably, all of us, got a friend who's taken too much skunk, tried to climb up the wall. Or some friend we've had who spent too many late hours coding, drunk 3 bottles of vodka and tried to be a fire drake. Needless to say, 7-story building, phone the police very quick. It's the only way that that's not going to turn out bad. Now, we have good reasons for being paranoid that mean it's not actually paranoia. Online, we have our friends Anonymous, whoever they are. We have pretty much every 16 and 17-year-old who's ever found a copy of 2600 and thinks they're elite. And on top of that, we have grizzled old hacks who can dial down modem cables, and you'd be surprised how many analog modems are still plugged into important systems in the world. There's 19 of them in this country, analog exchanges, just for the nuclear warning sirens. I used to live near one of them, so that's how I know it. But we have other reasons to be paranoid, more important reasons to be paranoid, really. These lovely people don't just own a UFO. They also own hundreds, possibly thousands of cryptographers. And if anybody on the planet knows how to crack all of the crypto we take for granted, it's them. I mean, they independently accidentally discovered public key cryptography 2 years before it was invented. So, I mean, if they're doing that in 1974, and they've got a hothouse and as many machines as you could possibly want to buy, many of them from old British companies like Ferranti, who had very weird machines, you can expect that probably they know an awful lot about everything that happens on the net. We have their friends, I was tempted to say Friends Electric, but I mean, they're friends in the NSA. They buy their computing horsepower by the hectare. They have done since the 80s, possibly older than that. And I did a conference a few years back in Salt Lake City in Utah, a Ruby conference. And my normal experience at Ruby conferences is turn up, give a talk full of code that probably has a kernel call or 3 in it somewhere, have most of the audience baffled and with, as the main expression for the whole talk, then get drunk and hang out with a couple of people on the speaker roster who equally like to poke bits and bytes in machines. I won't name them, but there's a whole crew of them in the Ruby world, and they don't go near Rails. So it's like you never see them at Rails conferences. On this particular occasion, I was actually mobbed that night at the bar. I had so many people who wanted to buy me beer for my talk about, basically it was about field level encryption in databases. This is where every single field in your database has a different key. So that if anybody breaks into your database, good luck with that. By the time they've finished cracking key 1, they can now work on key 2, and after a couple of dozen, perhaps your serialized object from Rails is now readable. I've never before been mobbed. I've never been a superstar. I mean, I talk about low-level stuff. It was amazing. I got really drunk. What was really amazing was I didn't pay for any of getting drunk. Normally, I have to pay for some of getting drunk, reciprocally. But of course, afterwards, I came back, and I'm talking to my business partner about it, and he said, well, you are aware what's in Utah. I said, no, I'm not aware what's in Utah. And he said, well, basically, the NSA just store data from the south of Utah into the north of Utah. They go a bit from the middle of Utah to the west of Utah. They don't tend to go too far to the east of Utah because the Rockies are in the way. So they do store some in Denver and up there, apparently, because once you get a mile up, it all gets flat again for a while. But yes, so these people have powers that are beyond the ken of us. These people over here, thanks to NIST's insistence that there are really 4 elliptic curves you should use in elliptic curve cryptography, probably know every single elliptic curve that's used in practice. Every single elliptic curve crypto, back and forth, they probably actually already know what it will look like off of the 4 numbers flying around as the parameters. They probably have them fully mapped. That by and of itself is kind of disturbing. Hence why people have started looking at these mad, twisted Edward curves, which go. It's basically like somebody's cut out the shape and thrown away the bit you would normally keep. There is something much more dangerous and insidious, though, than what states do. Because states actually mostly spy on people. I know that in practice, this turns out they spy on people for all the wrong reasons. But in principle, they think they're at least doing it for our own good. You know, they want to stop terrorists, or they want to make sure that organized crime doesn't make too much money, and that sort of thing. Lenovo's Sailfish, that was the best man-in-the-middle attack in history. I mean, if anybody was going to troll with a man-in-the-middle attack, this was it. Hi, you've got a BIOS. By the way, we've stuck a whole root certificate swapper in your BIOS. Yeah, sure, you've set up these secure connections going out. But, you know, when they pass through the BIOS, well, we translated them into our own SSL tunnels with our own, oh, yeah, well, we can spot everything you're doing. And do you know why we've done that for you? Because we love you. You're our customers. So make sure you get the right ads in your web pages. Now, that is a level of dumb any one of us here could do. To be honest, if somebody came to me and asked me to write that as a troll, I'd think, well, I've not done assembler in a while. Why not? I wouldn't really want to put it in a consumer product. Well, not unless it was something sort of like really scarily important, like a heart monitor or something. I mean, you know, we didn't just do it to your, no, we did it to your heart monitor, yeah. So you get perfect advertising while you're recovering from your heart attack. There's more to this, though. You see, because we store data, all of us, and many of the companies that we work for, they run freemium models. They're free to users, but they still have to pay for being free to users. Now, the nice ones are using that personal data to run through adware or whatever and just put advertising in, i.e. they're acting like an on-the-net version of Sailfish, and most of the time that's okay. I've been stalked by Laradoot for years over a pair of boots I once bought off them, and I'm not really sure why I only get them through Google now. 2.5 years is a long time to keep seeing the same pair of boots that they haven't had in stock for 2 years. But, you know, that's fair enough. They think they're getting something out of it, and my personal data with them is very, very inconsequential. But, of course, many companies that are taking personal data and running freemium models, that's not what they're doing with it. They're selling it. Our data is worth a lot of money, so they lift it, they run with it. Yay, they go. Lots of data. Somebody will pay 5 pence a go for an email address, if it's a good quality email address. You only need a standard, boring, snail mail style hit rate with your spam of 1 in 1,000. And 5 pence for 1 in 1,000 chance of landing a customer is actually a really good deal for a lot of businesses. Especially big ones that are too dumb to realize that actually once this is found out that they do it, people don't want to deal with them anymore. But there's a constant pressure for us, effectively, if we work in the freemium world, to be quite lossy with data, and that's not a good thing. So our paranoia isn't unreasonable. And in fact, anybody you talk to in network security who looks like they've taken way too much speed and probably haven't slept in 3 weeks, they probably both are true because they have a reasonable paranoia. They're self-medicating for the stupidity of how we do network systems. And that's kind of sad, really, because, you know, think of all those destroyed lives, people driven into Gotham who need never have gone there. So, I can't really comment. Or perhaps I can comment. I mean, you get privilege when you wear new rocks. So, we have to trust certain entities in this world. One of them is governments. We've all been through this. This is security theatre. Walking through a body scanner at an airport doesn't do any good. El Al hate these so much that they've had an ongoing battle with the US government to try and get scanning taken off of flights to Israel. This is because all of the methods they have that successfully spot potential hijackers don't work when people have gone through here and are stressed. Because now they're like, innocent people are like, but my shoes could have been a bomb. Oh my God, I've got the body language of a person whose shoes are a bomb. Oh my God, people are spotting I've got the body language of a person whose shoes are a bomb. Completely destroys any sensible profiling techniques. CCTV camera, most of this stuff produces crap footage that you couldn't identify anybody off of. And as for national ID cards, well, I mean, I've been kind of mean to Aadhaar here because they don't print a national ID card in India. You have to print your own. They only give you the number. These are the little compromises you have to make when you're trying to get 750 million people into a national ID scheme, you know. So you see, but that's actually quite an interesting thing because you see, the only way to actually be certain that an Aadhaar card is genuine is to run against their rather dodgy REST API with the number, which means you've got to have a network connection, preferably one that either can reliably OCR that, read the printed out barcode, and when you print your own, it's very easy to make these not read, or somebody typing in the number. And it doesn't give you back very much useful information to check the person with it is the person that should be with it. Things like that really annoy me. So we have to trust governments because they're privileged. If we don't trust them and we behave in a way they don't like, they come down on us like a ton of bricks. They have tanks and things. You know, there's a disparity of power between us and governments. And that's not necessarily a bad thing most of the time, but it certainly is where trust is concerned. Because if you have to trust somebody, it's not the same as wanting to trust them. But we ourselves have our own little power trip. We have guest books. We have pervasive 24/7 monitoring of everything that goes through our networks. I mean, we might not use it, but I mean, we certainly can do it. It's all digital data, it's on the wire, and it goes through our systems. And on top of that, if we want to, we can build all kinds of complicated security apparatus that we can convince users are helping. And all of this means that we have ridiculous amounts of data that we shouldn't have. And potentially, to come back to Ashley Madison, because I mean, whilst I really think it's very, very funny that people with actual government email addresses have signed up with their government email addresses to cheat on their spouses, we should, you know, I mean, that's just hilarious. Hi, I'm from the government. I've come to cheat. This stuff writes itself. But at the same time, now, of course, with all that data out, but that data's not really in the public domain. It's lurking around on you have to know where it is sites. So now all of those people are potentially quite blackmailable. Now, should they be blackmailable? No, because blackmail is a crime. Should they be told off for being idiots? Yes, their spouses should be hitting them around the head with things. But, you know, the point is that somebody in the middle can act in a manner that allows them to make a big profit off of that, to the disadvantage of not just that person, but also their poor bloody spouse who's never going to find out they were cheating, and then will wonder why the checking account, as our American friends call it, is out by $50,000 this year. This will get sold in the States. Yeah. I'm pretty certain there are more Americans on there than Brits. I mean, we're famed for our prurience, and you know, we don't do that sort of thing. I wonder how many French people are on there. But anyway, that's a dig for some friends at work. So the question comes down to who we can trust as tech people, actually implementing trust, and also who our users can trust when they come and deal with us. So firstly, technology bars the gates. You can put tech in place that stops people doing things. But the trouble is, people operate the tech. I'm going to show some code in a little while, because we will have time, if you don't mind it going at 90 miles to the dozen. But that will be about how we make sure stuff travels over the network securely. But what it doesn't cover is how you stop people from looking who've got the right to look. And that's a whole different talk. That's ISO 27001 compliance. Please come and contact me later, and I'll charge you £5,000 a day because the paperwork's horrible. Whereas this stuff is, when we design stuff, can we actually spot where we put those boundaries? Can we actually make sure that we ourselves can't look at the data? Because as a dev, if you can't look at the data coming over the network, then you can be pretty certain ops can't look at it. You can be pretty certain the business can't look at it, and you can be pretty certain that hackers don't look at it. So, I thought I took that build out. Okay, so just to recap, what I'm going to talk about is more than pinioned by this set of stuff that's already up on my slide share. My slide share is full of actual working code. I can't guarantee the code I'm going to show in a minute is working, mostly because I hacked it together from other code examples before coming on stage. But there is a lot of stuff out there, and I'm always open to answering questions if people are actually interested in why you wouldn't do this or why you'd do that. And I have a professional-grade cryptographer who can butt in and say, well, that's a dumb thing to do. So we're going to have a little run-through first of the basics, the most basic. Every single dev needs to know the next slide. There are slides after it you should all know as well. But the next slide is what every single dev who writes a network system needs to know. Encrypt all transports. Now that sounds easy. Let's use HTTPS. Except it's not that easy. Because HTTPS itself has an awful lot of caveats to it. So here's a little checklist of things that you can do that make your transports quite secure. After I gave this set of checklists in Goa, a very good friend of mine, who's one of the programmers I most respect on the planet for, my God, you're productive, and God, your code's scarily good, came up to me and said, I'm so glad I don't have to do any of that anymore, I'm retiring. And I said, why not? He said, I wouldn't want to be a programmer if I had to do all that. So I'm not saying any of this stuff is easy, although once you've done it once, it actually becomes very easy, because you know how to do it. But firstly, if you're going to exchange any information online, don't exchange it directly over one crypto connection. Set up a crypto connection so you can swap keys. So use public-private key pairs, RSA stuff, swap keys with the other party, but don't swap RSA keys with them. Well, you want their public key for the key exchange. But after that, you do not want to use RSA for any of your on-the-wire crypto. RSA needs phenomenally big bit lengths to actually be reasonably secure. It's been cracked at 768-bit. So if you're using a key less than 768-bit, there are machines on the planet that can crack that in a reasonable period of time. Bearing in mind, when the internet was first getting into all this crypto stuff in the mid-1990s, we were using 128-bit SSL keys. And at the time, they were very secure. You can see that whilst this is supposed to be an exponential increase in pain, it hasn't been. Because we're moving out of doing everything down sequential processes into doing everything multi-core. And once you're doing multi-core, you can start doing hypercubes. And instead of having to go, being able to go at the squared power, you can go at the cubed or the quad power of the actual performance of an individual box. So this stuff is going to get easier to break as time goes on, not harder. And if anybody ever turns on a quantum computer, you better be using phenomenally big bit lengths for your public keys. They are much easier to break with quantum technology than symmetric ciphers, if you use symmetric ciphers correctly. I mention that because I know a couple of people down at Bristol who may just be on the verge of launching a quantum processor in the next year or two. I got a chance to wander around a lab and look at all this optics kit that's now been shrunk into a chip. And it's very exciting because mostly what people in the crypto world now want to do is build things that quantum processors can't break. So we need quantum processors to make sure they don't break our stuff. So hurry up, everybody. There is a trick that is used an awful lot in places like SSH, which is when you get a cert with a key, pin the cert. Keep that cert for that connection. Actually force them to have to do something to change the actual key they're allowed to use on that connection and provide a valid certificate again to do it. It actually provides you with an awful lot more security than just accepting random keys and random certs, and also do make sure those certs are valid. Once you've actually got symmetric key from the other party, don't both of you use the same key. You swap keys. You give them one, they give you one. You've now got two separate crypto tunnels that have to be separately broken for anybody to actually see what's really happening between the two of you. And sensible people actually then don't use those keys for very long. They swap them from time to time, and they don't swap them directly. They swap them out of band by using another set of public-private key exchanges. If you want to be really anal, you can literally swap keys every single time you send a message. You'd think that that would be expensive, but it can be surprisingly inexpensive if you've got the right kind of traffic flow for it. And then good luck to anybody who tries to break into any of your secure comms. Because for every single message they get, if they crack it, they still don't get the key for the next one. And finally, this is an interesting point of contention at present, one-time pads. Has anybody read Wired recently? There's this article by the founder of a secure email service called Zendo. And he wrote an article on how one-time pads are fundamentally broken. Now, I should point out, one-time pads are something that fall out of information theory. A guy called Shannon in the mid-40s looked at a lot of cryptography that had been developed in the years before it, turned it into actual math and said, wow, if you only ever use a key once, and you bind it to an individual message, and then you ever use that message again, it's always the encrypted form with just that key, there's nothing with which to break the key. Because there's no plaintext to compare against it with a different variation of how the key would transform the plaintext. One-time pads are something that most people in crypto aspire to using whenever possible. Because if you use one-time pads, they have management issues. You have to somehow keep this mapping. And I mean, to be honest, in practice, most systems based on one-time pads sort of degrade that a little bit. They say, well, perhaps it's okay to never reuse the key, but use a different key with the same message in the future. That's not actually true. It isn't okay. But probably for a long-running system, it would be bad compared to a short-running system. But it depends on what the periodicity of those two terms is. I'm not actually sure. But anyway, this chap who wrote his bit for Wired, do not use his email service because he tried to demolish this 1947 paper by claiming there were two different kinds of randomness in there and they weren't equivalent. That's a fundamental failure to understand the very thing he's selling, which is very disturbing. We have some code coming now. Do be ready. I'm sorry about this. The first one doesn't look so bad because it's quite a small program. HTTPS in Go. This is trivial to do. If you're not doing it and you're doing web services, do it. I mean, there's no skin off my nose, but somewhere someone will probably eventually have a bad experience because you're not. And it won't be me that's liable because it's not my code. It will be you. So I tend to use a very functional style myself, and this particular library suits me perfectly because I can just chuck a closure in. Be careful when you chuck this closure in. Don't put any state in there that might get muddled up with another connection. It's a rookie mistake, and one that I've made dozens of times despite not being a rookie. Closures are so much fun and so easy to get wrong. Basically, all you really need to do is you need to have a certificate and you need to have a key, and they both come in PEM files, and this is a standard key exchange and certificate exchange format. And then people can just talk to your website relatively securely. If you want them to really trust you, make sure that it's not a self-signed cert. I use a self-signed cert on my email. If I ever find a real cert in my email, I'll know somebody's compromised my server. That's not really a good principle, but I mean, it is like, yeah. It's an Apple box. I mean, somebody's going to probably break into it at some point with some exploit that I don't bother patching because I'm running X number of versions behind on the operating system. But I could go back to FreeBSD if it mattered. But yes, as you can see, only two things to know about. Net HTTP, you don't have to make any crypto calls. HTTPS is taken care of for you without having to care about that. And your closure, and obviously, you've got some paths. There's a nice little wrapper for route management. I'm trying to remember the name of it. HTTP router. And basically with it, you can have mostly Rails-y style routes. because it will do regex matching and stuff like that. But it's very lightweight. It's like about 200 lines of code. You can read it yourself and make sure it really does what you want it to do. That's all there is to say about HTTPS, really. I mean, it's simple. So I'm not going to show you how to do any more communication, or any communications in this talk that aren't encrypted. And all of the code examples fit on one slide. So this is not complicated code. I mean, it's got ins and outs, but it can fit on one slide. And this is 26 point as well, which for me is quite a big point size for a 2-column code slide. So this little one, this is how to do TCP connections where you also use TLS. Effectively, to do TCP servers that are TCP-S. And this is relatively simple to do. Oh. I'm still within the actual 40 minutes. This surprises me. So, I mean, firstly, this is a really bad thing to do. Write functions that have the same name as functions that live in the standard library packages. And I do apologize for it. It was a sort of quick hack. But this is not what you're supposed to say about security code. It was a quick hack. I mean, it's just not. But this is, you know, pedagogic code. It's not, you should go and use this in the real world. I would expect people to go and mean something and then change the name. The main thing here is you need to be able to accept on a socket. And after that, inside, have a little go routine that chucks some stuff off using the connection that you get. That's it. And from here on in, you'll notice, because we've got a go routine, we are concurrent. Concurrency is really cheap to do in Go. To the point that it's like, if you can do something that you think you might want to use 2 of at the same time, wrap it, put a go routine in that calls a closure, and just chuck closures at it. It really is that easy. I so wish that it was like that in C. The other thing you need to be able to do to set up a secure connection is actually load a cert. So that's all taken care of you with the HTTPS, because it knows you're going to want to load a cert. Over here, we have to go to all the pain of actually building a list of certificates, generating a random number that can be used, and doing some other stuff. But basically, that will just take a cert, and it will give you something that you can use for setting up a TLS connection. All of the code underneath that's written by people who actually know what they're doing. So as long as you can get to that point, you're safe, because people who are paid an awful lot are working on this at Google, who have a very strong professional reputation in cryptography. When I switched over from doing all of my crypto research in Ruby to doing it in Go, it was just like, oh God, I never have to touch OpenSSL again. This stuff is actually good. And yeah, it's just, I assume that an awful lot of stuff running at Google is actually secured internally over the wires. I mean, I wouldn't build an architecture that wasn't, so I'm sure they don't. If they do, obviously, I'm available for parties. So, being a client for TCP is actually not much different to being a server for TCP. The only difference is, I mean, I've still got to go through the doing something with a cert. I do hope, no, I did decide to do it in the right order for the way I wanted to talk about it. That's good. So, yeah, again, we have to load in a key pair from a cert. We build our cert list. Very rarely will you have more than one cert in this list. If you have more than one, it's because you're actually trying to validate a long chain of cert signings. The main place where I run into having to put lots in there is dealing with passports, because if you ever deal with digital passport data, there's like 200K of cert chain, which is just ridiculous. But also, the default here is false for insecure skip verify. This makes sure that it actually checks it's a valid cert from a valid cert authority. If you're actually doing private stuff and you want to run your own CA, make that true, but put something else in that will spot whether or not somebody's trying to inject a cert that you don't know. Well, I guess you could man in the middle of the whole call and put it through your own fake cert authority. But anyway, that sounds like it would probably be more work anyway. Might be fun. The other part here is, yet again, I've reused the name of a call in net, which is kind of naughty. But effectively, any kind of TCP connection in Go, you do a dial to its socket. And here we just do some boring buffer IO rubbish, and it does stuff. But from the point of view of the code that you've actually written, it doesn't really look like you're doing anything involving cryptography at all, apart from the fact you have to start the connection up with a cert. So you as an app developer trying to write something that runs securely over TCP IP, you don't have to worry about the encryption or the decryption that's going on. That's being taken care of by TLS for you. Okay. Whew. Who here likes UDP? Excellent. I very rarely get a positive response to that question. Last time I got a positive response, I was at a conference here in London as well, so it must be a London thing, which is good. I live in the right city. If only people would hire me to work on just UDP projects, that'd be lovely. A year of just doing that. But no, it's one of those things. I stand up at Ruby events, or I stand up at more professional events, and I say, who likes UDP? And I'm lucky if one person in the room sticks their hand up. I used to be an embedded systems programmer, so to me, UDP is actually, well, why don't we just start by sending frames down the wire and see what happens? And then perhaps we might need something more complicated for flow control or connection management or something later. Whereas it turns out that actually most people come down these days from HTTP. So when they hit TCP, it's because they're really letting go and being wild. It's a different mindset. So here we've got a little example. Basically, you'll notice that I've improved my naming slightly in here. This was originally called listen, and now it's called serve. If you're doing UDP, most people don't think of UDP as client-server, because that UDP isn't about client-server, it's about peer-to-peer. But actually, if I want you to talk to me over my secure connection that I want to set up with you, I'm a server. You have to come and ask me to set that connection up. It's not just randomly happening. And it might well be that we're both servers in parallel, sending packets to each other to set up 2 crypto connections. But we are a server. So servers in UDP just feels all wrong, and yet somehow it's exactly how this kind of code always writes itself. So, there's not a lot to this. There's some appallingly dull stuff, writing to UDP sockets. This bloody thing. I hate this. First, I have to resolve the address, then I have to listen on the address, then I have to get a connection and do something on the address. I mean, that's 3 lines of code. Can't somebody abstract that away so I don't have to think? Well, I do. I normally write a wrapper. But I mean, there's something slightly offensive about how UDP is handled in the standard library, because I suspect most people aren't using it very often, and it's not a point that gets love. But it should. So the main getcha with UDP is that you're actually having to put byte buffers in all over the place. But then that's true with TCP/IP when you're using that. The main convenience of HTTPS for me is that I don't have to care how many bytes are going to be in a buffer. I can expect that something somewhere will give me a string, and then I can turn that back into a byte buffer if I really care. Or I can just take it with gob, and we'll see gob in a while. I shouldn't call it that because it sounds awful, but I can't think of any other way. GOB? I mean, who's going to say GOB dot something? I mean, it's gob dot something, isn't it? I mean, it's just horrible. I ranted about that at a conference in the States once, and nobody knew why I was ranting. Americans don't gob. Who'd have thunk? We've got a main thing we need to be able to do. We've actually got to roll our own encryption now. We're not using TLS for this. I mean, probably I could have done an example that used TLS, but I mean, that wouldn't really be very educational, would it? Because we've seen it with TCP/IP. But we've got to go through the whole job of doing some encryption for ourselves. If you're going to do encryption, you're going to do symmetric encryption, use AES. It's a nice, solid algorithm. Only use 256-bit, unless you need GCM mode, which is a way of doing, a particular mode for doing streaming, which is 128-bit. There are a few things in there that I don't really want to talk to in too much detail. What's the next one? Okay. This is really badly named, and this is a call I've written, quantize. One of the problems you have with AES is you have to manage your block size. If you leave empty stuff at the end, stuff at the end of a block, it's quite handy for people who are attacking what you've put in your encrypted message. because they can guess just how much of that block is full of nulls. And then they can try plain text attacks against the nulls plus random crap. And whilst it doesn't sound like it should be very reliable, it's actually a really good attack and works quite well. The other thing is, we're now in the land where we have to care about IVs. These are initialization vectors. This is random crap that you're going to create every time you use your key to send stuff. And the other party needs that to be able to decrypt. It is okay to send this as plain text. This by and of itself doesn't compromise your crypto, but you still have to generate them. Right, final code slide, and we'll be quick. Or is it? No, it may not be. Okay, this is the equivalent, being a client and doing AES. Back to the server in the previous code example. And this is pretty similar. There's very little difference in what goes on. It's just basically you have to set up a connection and you run a decryptor rather than an encryptor. Let's see, we'll skip past that. Because really, RSA over UDP. RSA is a really dumb thing to send over to use for encrypting UDP, because most people are trying to keep their UDP packets small, and RSA is the worst way to encrypt when you've got small lengths of data. But if you want to, you can send super packets and pass around public-private keys just using UDP connections. And that's exactly what this does. It's actually much easier code, because most of handling RSA is quite simple, and it's taken care of for you. I'm not going to go into depths except to say there's also a client. The client is more complicated than the server, whereas with AES, the server is more complicated than the client. So, right. AES plus RSA, i.e. putting a crypto tunnel in another crypto tunnel with different kinds of cryptography, is known as hybrid crypto. It's what TLS does for you, and it's the new hotness, apparently, because everybody was going on about it. We're going to run very quickly. So, encrypt your passwords. Encrypting your passwords is not difficult. Use Unicode. You want the biggest symbol space possible for passwords. The bigger the symbol space, the larger the rainbow tables to attack it. Hash everything before you receive it. Never receive a user's password. Only receive a hash of it with a known key that you gave them. Because that way, you don't know what their password is. You just cannot know what their password is. There's no way to reverse it without a huge rainbow table and spending ages just doing their one code. Cryptographically secure hashes, HMACs. If you need to sign anything, or you need to send something in a form that can't be reversed, always use a HMAC. These things are cryptographically secure. You want to send a HMAC with MD5. That's cryptographically secure. Bearing in mind how awful MD5 and RC4 both are. But their HMACs are cryptographically secure, so you can use them. Fresh HMAC key for every password that you allow somebody to submit, i.e. the password should be a one-time piece of information that's shared between you. Sort everything. Hash it again. Hashing is incredibly cheap. People don't understand just how cheap hashing is. It's much, much quicker than the cost of waiting for the thing to come off the network card and for you to be able to deal with. So you can actually do hashing incredibly quickly and fast. Two-factor authentication. Who uses two-factor authentication in any of the systems they work on? Do you send 6-digit codes to people's phones? Well, that's something. All right. The point of two-factor authentication isn't that it's to a known device. I mean, that's a given. The point of two-factor authentication is it's a separate band channel. You're out of band. When you're building architectures, it's nice to set up as many out-of-band communications as you can to do the thing. The more out-of-band connections you have to do the various parts of the interaction with your users, the more difficult it is for anybody to even spot there is communication with your users. And each one of them is a separate tunnel. Each one's got separate encryption on it. So compromising one doesn't compromise others. What else have we got down here that's important? Oh, yeah. Your confirmation codes should be HMACs. They shouldn't be designed to be typed in as a 6-digit code. That's very easily cracked. I mean, you've just expanded normal keyboard, password key attacks to 6 digits. So what? That's really trivial. Once you've done this, you have 2 secure communications channels. This means you can use the second channel to report to the user on what the first channel is doing. If you're not doing that, you're wasting the main benefit of having two-factor authentication, the back channel. Which I probably shouldn't say, because I've got a patent around that that's not quite gone through yet. Another tense 12 months before it actually gets published, and it's sort of, yeah. So in crypto storage, the same rules apply. I mean, basically, don't keep indexes, keep HMACs of indexes. Every single field in a sensitive record, encrypt those fields separately. Lock your databases down with public-private key pairs that only belong to a specified user who can only be used for read or can only be used for write. I mean, basically separate all of the responsibilities in your system and make everybody have to jump through hoops. And then you can build genuine black boxes that if somebody comes and takes your box away, they will have to brute force every single field in your database. And if that's like 100K of data, I mean, that's still horrible. But if, like a lot of systems that I've worked on, you've got X terabytes of data being generated an hour just to register users, suddenly that becomes a significant problem for an attacker. And your data store is really just a whole pile of comms channels. It may look like an Oracle database or a MySQL database, but actually it's just a whole pile of comms channels. And you should treat it as such. And that means anything you would think of doing with a comms channel to secure it or how you would route it or anything like that, database is a thoroughly valid way to do that at a field level, at a record level, or at a table level. And once you wake up one day and suddenly that makes sense in your head, you can build things that other people go, my God, it doesn't matter if Google do turn on that quantum computer. Because how do they attack it? So finally, you need to anchor trust internally. Now, there's a whole pile of technical stuff you need to do, certificate authorities, differentiation of roles between microservices, minimizing threat services. There's actually something that's not on this list that's more important than anything else. Make sure that the people you employ are genuinely trustworthy. Don't just go, we build something secure, let's take the first dev who gets sent along who's got the right words on their CV. At least CRB check them. Beyond that, I mean, check them out with all the people you know who might know them. If you're building secure code, it's the one time when actually only hiring your friends starts to look like a very good strategy if you've got the right friends. And never hiring your friends is a good strategy if you've got the other type of friend. So that is Whispered Secrets. Don't have time for questions.
Just in time, but we have 2 or 3 minutes for questions. Okay. Yeah, I have one. Oh.
So with all these certificates, how do you manage them? No, because...
You know, it's a very good question. Databases mainly. Secure databases in which you store the certs. The trouble with all of this is basically turtles all the way down until it isn't. And it's very difficult to sort of just say, oh, well, you're going to have to manage certs, fine, use this particular data store and just shove them in there. You actually have to apply exactly the same principles at every level of design. A cert store, if you're running your own cert authority, each of the individual certs should be, the access to it should be locked down, so you've got to have a particular key to get at it, and only particular roles in a system can get at it. So it's, yeah, a bit of a minefield. Tread with caution, I think, is really what I'd say.
So on the concept of trust, if a system is compromised for some reason, even if it's a minor compromise because maybe it's an official thing like a government or whatever, do you have any advice on communication generally with your user base and managing that trust?
Be completely honest about the scale of the compromise. Be entirely transparent about what you're going to do to fix it. Be entirely transparent from day one about how you design the thing. If you're, it's a difficult one for me to talk about because I mean the kind of systems I build, by their very nature, people tend to think they're valuable and therefore they want to patent them. And patenting system designs is actually very handy because now everybody can see the system design, along with the entire description of why the system design exists. This isn't really something you can do in most software businesses because that side isn't what the business values. And if people are going to actually put money into putting anything in the public sphere, they're going to put it into the bits they value. But ideally, when you design a system, you should have documentation that's, I hate to say it because I can't stand ISO standards, but if you follow ISO 27000 for the intent of doing it well, as opposed to pass the tick boxes on the various checks, you should have detailed description of exactly how the security works in your system and why. And if it's compromised, there is no harm in then saying, this is what we've now fixed, and this is why we made the mistake. People are a lot more trusting when they know that the people they're dealing with are honest and open. The worst thing you can possibly do is claim, we haven't had a data breach. No, that's all faked data. Because then somebody will dump 14 gig of your personal files. So it's the perfect week to be giving this talk.
Last one.
So this is maybe a question on advice. We all know Ken Thompson injected the compiler back in like 83, 84. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens now that he works on Go, defending against Ken Thompson hacks. Any advice on that?
I have the pleasure of working with a research team of my own. And I come from an embedded systems background. I mean, I've written real-time operating systems in assembler myself. And I must admit, we tend to look at that sort of stuff from a point of view of it's a handy optimization for when we're doing stuff in particular environments. It's quite nice if you can actually, I don't know. Let's say you take an anonymous function and you strip it all down so that there's absolutely nothing there that's the boilerplate for a function. And then you just go, well, let's store that as data. And then you create a page fault that causes that data to load, and the next thing you know, you're running the function you want to with the keys you want to that came from somewhere else the same way, so they're not at all associated. You now have a great way of doing security that nobody can see you're doing it. Conversely, if the person who's written that function that's completely au naturel with no function pre-header or anything, does exactly the same thing, and they know where you store your keys, funnily enough, they now own your entire system without you knowing it's happened. It's called there's always some clever bugger out there that you can't beat. However, you can make sure that clever bugger has a really difficult time getting the injection attack in the first place. So if you're building a system that's a web system, first they have to get some code into your servers. If you're building a system that's a mobile system, first they have to get some code into your mobile app, which is fun. But totally doable on Android, very trivially. If you're building anything for security purposes and you're putting it on Android, please don't. Build for iOS. You get at least a moderately secure environment there. If you do need a secure environment, get in touch with some people at a company called Trustonic, pay them a phenomenal amount of money, and they will give you the specific keys issued by particular manufacturers for their Android devices, and then you'll get something like keychain security in Sony and whatever. I don't know. I'm not really an Android fan, so I can't comment. I've never made an Android phone do what I wanted it to do as a phone. I have as other things. So yeah, I mean, the main thing is there are people out there, no matter how clever you are, no matter how good your system design is, there are people who can subvert it. But the first place they're going to have to attack, if you get the internal structure of the teams who work on your stuff right, is they're first going to have to attack people and convince people to give them some kind of privileged access. And that's what all long-term security comes down to, making sure that it's not possible to co-opt the people who work on the system. You know, insider threat is actually more dangerous than somebody going, well, I can just inject a random amount of genuine code into the middle of a running process. So, especially if the insider threat comes from somebody who can do that.
Cool. Thank you, Eleanor.